Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of fullpreterism.com or gospel eschatology. Tonight, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to expose and critique a recent debate between Doug Wilson, who's a partial preterist postmillennialist, and Chris Gordon, an amillennialist. Now, this debate went in a lot of different directions. It was a long interaction. It covered theonomy, the role of the church and the state, um, post-millennialism versus amillennialism. Who's the ultimate enemy of the church? Is it the sin, the death, and the law, or is it the state? And it just went in all kinds of directions. Passivism uh, versus not passivism. But my critique is going to be on what is said regarding the judgment of the living and the dead, because it's at that point that Mr. Gordon mentions full preterism, and this is kind of where the rub is for all of us. So let's go ahead and play this interaction here, where Doug is very confused because in his book he takes the seventh trumpet as being fulfilled in AD 70, but here in this debate he concedes to the amillennialist that it's future. So we need some clarification from Doug. Let's play this.
2 is ask of me, and I will make the nations your inheritance,
Right.
the ends of the earth your possession. So
Praise God, that's happening.
yeah, that
Praise that we're doing that
so,
now.
but this is the point.
It's happening now.
It has happened. It is happening, and it will happen manifestly at the seventh trumpet.
Seventh trumpet.
Yeah, when he comes again to judge the living and the dead.
Right.
Okay. So right there, you heard Doug say that it's at the seventh trumpet that he's going to raise the living and the dead. All right. And he takes that as future, and the amillennialist agreed. So rather confusing, to say the least. So let's read a little bit from what Doug says in his commentary on Revelation, entitled When the Man Comes Around. All right. Some very confusing statements here. The first one on page 127 at the very bottom, he says, this interlude between the sixth and the seventh trumpets is a pause before the judgment of AD 70 falls upon Jerusalem. Okay, so there you would be thinking, okay, well, maybe he's saying that the seventh trumpet blew when Jerusalem was destroyed, especially since there's so much typology between the two witnesses and the two spies that go into to Jericho, and the trumpets being blown, and how that great city has to fall before the inheritance can take place. That's a whole nother subject that I covered in one of my lectures, but let's go on here. On page 135, he says this: the seventh trumpet indicates the formal establishment of Daniel's fifth kingdom. That'd be the Messianic kingdom. The rock that struck Nebuchadnezzar's great statue on the feet, and which then grew to become a mountain that filled the entire earth. The seventh trumpet indicates the formal inauguration of Christ's reign on earth. Christ had ascended into the heavenly places 40 years before and had approached the Ancient of Days on the clouds of heaven, Daniel 7:13, where he was granted universal dominion. Okay, so error number one, Daniel 7:13 is not talking about the ascension. It's talking about the second coming of Christ. That's the way it's developed and cited everywhere in the New Testament: Matthew 24:30, Revelation 1:7, even the immediate context before and after Daniel 7:13 and Daniel 7 makes it clear that that's when he comes as the Ancient of Days to open up the books and to judge. Okay, that this is the end of the millennium, second coming of Christ. All right, so that's error number one. But this is very confusing because he's saying that the seventh trumpet is the inauguration of the kingdom and connects it to the ascension. So was it at the ascension, Doug, that the seventh trumpet sounded kind of, sorta, but it's kind of like one of those already not yet trumpets? It kind of sounded in AD 7 or AD 30 around, but it's kind of sounding, and it gets really, really loud and finally sounds at the end of world history. I mean, what is your understanding of the already not yet of this seventh trumpet? We're very, very confused. And then on page 136, in the middle, he says, the nations were angry, but God's wrath came upon them. This is referring to the judgment of the dead in verse 18 of chapter 11. He says, "It was the time of the dead, which I do not take as the last judgment at the end of history. Rather, the lament of the saints had earlier asked how long God would delay his judgment, how long before he avenged their blood. The same word for judgment is used here, and this is the point where God gives his reward to his servants, the prophets, the saints, and to those who feared his name, whether small or great. God would destroy those who destroyed the land or the earth, and a new age, the Christian age, opened up." Well, number one, I haven't found any translation that translates judgment as avenged. And Revelation 11 is a really, really difficult passage. I remember asking David Chilton when he was a partial preterist, when he held to Doug's position. I said, "What was the hardest part of writing your commentary on the book of Revelation?" He says, "It was really easy until I got to chapter 11. All right. And then he didn't elaborate, but it's really clear why it got difficult at chapter 11, because chapter 11 is connecting the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70 with the judgment of the dead, which would imply the resurrection of the dead. And this, of course, goes back to Daniel 12, where you have the resurrection, the appointed time of the resurrection of the just and the unjust. That is the Old Testament fulfillment of this particular judgment of the dead. So this is why it's such a difficult passage for partial preterists. Now, it's also a very difficult passage for Mr. Chris Gordon, who's an amillennialist that disregards the time statements, disregards the covenant structure, and contrasts between the two wives, the two cities, and the two covenants. And he also fudges radically on who this city is in Revelation 11:8. The great city is clearly where the Lord was slain, which is Old Covenant Jerusalem. And it's only one city that is guilty of killing the Old Testament prophets and even the New Testament prophets, and that is Old Covenant Jerusalem. So this is where the rub is, okay? And this is where full preterism comes in and kind of saves the day and solves this problem. These two men, I think, are a good example of what we saw in a book that Doug Wilson co-authored with two other partial preterists and a bunch of amillennialists that we epically destroyed in House Divided, and showed how all their disagreements actually formed full preterism and does not in any way, shape, or form refute it. Let me give you a couple examples before we get into Revelation 10 and 11. So Chris Gordon, amillennialist, would say this regarding the book of Revelation. He would say, the coming of Christ throughout the book of Revelation is the second coming event that ends the millennium of Revelation 20 and brings about the judgment and resurrection of the living and the dead. We agree with him. This is a very basic reading of Revelation. It is the second coming, and that second coming would end the millennium when the judgment of the living and the dead takes place. That's orthodox. We embrace that orthodox, straight, true position. Okay. Now, but Doug Wilson, a postmillennial partial preterist, would say this that is also orthodox, and we would agree with. He says, but the coming of Christ in Revelation was spiritually fulfilled soon and shortly in AD 70, at which time there was a corporate resurrection, kind of sort of vindication of the martyrs. I'm not going to get into any details of that. Don't ask me any questions about it, especially Daniel 12, as it's connected to that. But okay, Doug, we're going to take that and we're going to still run with it, because here's the conclusion of both of these men and what they're saying here. Therefore, the soon or shortly spiritual second coming that is described throughout the book of Revelation ended the millennium of Revelation 20, at which time there was not the judgment and resurrection of the living and the dead event, in which it was fulfilled at that time. Example number 2, the recapitulation structure of Revelation itself demands that the millennium ended at Christ's soon coming in AD 70. Chris Gordon, again, an amillennialist, would say the end of the millennium judgment scene in Revelation 20 has already been recapitulated and described for us in chapters 1 through 19 and chapters 21 and 22. We agree with that. Again, 100%. But we'd also agree with what Doug says here. But the recapitulated judgment scene found in Revelation 1 through 19 and 21 and 22 was fulfilled soon and shortly upon Jerusalem in AD 70. We agree. Well, what happens when you combine both of these orthodox positions? Again, you get full preterism. Therefore, the end of the millennium judgment scene in Revelation 20 has been recapitulated in chapters 1 through 19 and chapters 21 and 22, and was therefore fulfilled soon and shortly in the judgment of AD 70. And now let's get into the area of critique, Revelation 10 and 11, and let's break this down. Chris Gordon would say, when the great city is judged at the sound of the seventh trumpet, when that takes place, that is when the judgment of the dead takes place. And it is the same judgment of the dead that takes place at the end of the millennium in Revelation 20, verses 7 through 15. Not only that, but this trumpet that sounds, the seventh trumpet in Revelation 10 and 11, is the same trumpet of Matthew 24:31, 1 Thessalonians 4:16, and 1 Corinthians 15:52. We agree with that 100%. That's basic analogy of faith. It's good exegesis. It's solid. But what Doug Wilson says here is also solid. The seventh trumpet of, I think, because we still don't know what Doug believes about the seventh trumpet, but every other partial preterist that I know of does say that the seventh trumpet sounded in AD 70. But if he's saying that and he's confused, if he says the seventh trumpet happened in AD 70, then we would agree, because that is when the great city, Jerusalem, is judged in AD 70. So again, combining these two positions, the amillennial and partial preterist view, when the great city, Old Covenant Jerusalem, was judged at the sound of the seventh trumpet in AD 70, is when the dead of Revelation 11 and Revelation 20 were judged. This is the same trumpet in Matthew 24, 1 Thessalonians 4, and 1 Corinthians 15. It's the same resurrection. It's the same coming of Christ. It's the same trumpet. It's all the same event. So let's examine Doug's exegetical failures and break them down. All right. Doug says throughout this interaction, he always appeals to the already and not yet. Whenever he gets in a bind, the already and not yet. Well, let's look at what Revelation itself says about the already and not yet, and see how Doug see if his position stands or not. He says in the video that the seventh trumpet that is blown in Revelation 10 and 11 involves the already not yet process that was fulfilled in AD 70, but awaits another not yet eschaton. Now, our response, the book of Revelation lays out the time frame of the already and not yet process in chapter 1. Let's read it. Write the things that thou hast seen, and the things that are, there's your already, the things that are taking place in John's time. He's in the tribulation with them, but he's anticipating the judgment of the city and the judgment of the resurrection, or the judgment of the dead and the resurrection of the dead. And the things that are about to come after these things. Now, there's your not yet, but where does John place the not yet? He says the not yet of Revelation are things that are about to be fulfilled. They're not 2,000 plus years away. Doug has artificially read into the book of Revelation an already and specifically a not yet that Revelation itself does not discuss. He's read that in to keep his job and to be in line with the creeds. And that there's no other way of saying it than just that, because it's not there and he knows it. And that's why he won't debate me. And that's why he won't interact with me or Don Preston. All right. John is specifically told the eschatological, not yet future things of the seventh trumpet would be about to be fulfilled in his day. And we're not 2,000 plus years away. Reiterate that. Now, B, let's keep continuing and see when the not yet of Revelation would be. The things not yet that must soon take place. Revelation 1:1. Now, John is being given a vision of the prophecy of this book, singular, and he says that the things in the prophecy of this book would be fulfilled soon or shortly. He doesn't say most of Revelation would be fulfilled shortly and soon, but there's this not yet that's 2,000 plus years away. He doesn't say that. Again, Doug is reading something into the book of Revelation that is simply not there. Let's look at C. Revelation 1:3. This is key. Blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of this prophecy, and blessed are those who hear and who keep what is written, for the appointed time, Greek kairos, is near. Kairos is used 3 times in the book of Revelation, and I want you to pay attention to it because one of them is in our passage. The only other time John uses kairos is in our text, Revelation 11:18. That's the appointed time for the judgment of the dead. And Revelation 22:10, both of which go back to the appointed time for the judgment and resurrection of the dead predicted in Daniel 12:2-4. The Greek, or the Hebrew and Greek Septuagint version of Daniel 12, verse 4, uses kairos. It was the appointed time. Daniel, seal up the vision for the appointed time, for it's far off, and you're going to go to sleep, and you won't experience this until you are raised out of Hades. Okay, Daniel? So this, again, is the Old Testament fulfillment of the judgment of the dead. And Doug doesn't touch it. He doesn't touch it in his book. He doesn't do any Greek work on kairos at all and go to the Old Testament passage that it's fulfilling, because he knows if he did, he would have to deal with Revelation or Daniel 12, and that would sink his creedal ship. All right. Number 1, the nations raged. Here it is, Revelation 11:18. But your wrath came, and the appointed time, Greek kairos, for the dead to be judged, both small and great. That's the same language that's used at the judgment of the dead event at the end of the millennium of Revelation 20. And it's not just similar language. This is just simply recapitulation of the same judgment of the dead event. Number 2, do not seal up the words of the prophecy of this book, singular. Again, all the not yet of Revelation was about to be fulfilled, for the appointed time is near, kairos. Daniel is told, seal it up, seal up the appointed time of the judgment, of the prophecy of the judgment and resurrection of the dead. John is told the exact opposite. Don't seal up the appointed time of the judgment, the prophecy of the judgment and resurrection of the dead event, because the appointed time is now near. Again, Doug does no Greek work on the appointed time, where it's used elsewhere in the book of Revelation, and he doesn't go back to Daniel 12 in the Septuagint where it is drawing from. Okay, so how many appointed times then are there in Daniel 12? Daniel says it's the appointed time of the end. Notice he doesn't say there are going to be appointed times when Messiah comes, and he's going to prophesy of 2 ends. And John in Revelation is going to prophesy of 2 ends. No, it's appointed time of the end, singular. And the New Testament writers are saying the appointed time of the judgment of the dead predicted in Daniel, that appointed time is at hand. They don't say that there's 2, only 1. That's really important, because partial preterists slip in a second one and call it the already not yet. The Bible tells us, the New Testament tells us when the not yet is going to take place, and it was imminent. And so you got to stop playing games there, Doug. Doug also, besides not dealing with kairos, he never deals with the 3.5 years and where it is connected in Daniel. Again, Daniel 12. Never will go back to the Old Testament. He avoids Daniel 12 like a plague. Revelation 11. At the sound of the 7th trumpet, Old Covenant Jerusalem would be trodden down by Rome for 3.5 years in the war between roughly AD 67 to 70. Now, Doug would agree with that, but he wouldn't tell you that this is the appointed time. Going back to Daniel 12. Daniel's told the tribulation and resurrection, that's the appointed time of the end, would be again for 3.5 years when the power of the holy people is completely shattered. Now, Daniel 9, at the very end of Daniel's 70 weeks, Messiah is cut off for 3.5 years in that last 7, and then there's 3.5 years that remain, and that is referring to the war, all right, in Daniel 9, 26 and 27, when the Romans would come and desolate the city and the temple. And in the Septuagint, it's, again, the appointed time. And so Daniel 12 is nothing more than a recapitulation of the tail end of that 490 years, Daniel 70 weeks, when the war takes place. Let's look at some other passages. Revelation 11:18, partial preterists concede to AD 70. They also concede Revelation 22:7 and verses 10 and 12 to AD 70. Well, let's look at the end of the millennium, the judgment and resurrection of the dead event there, and see if these are the same events. I think it's pretty clear they are. The appointed time has come for judging the dead and for rewarding your servants, both great and small. I am coming soon. They say it's the second coming. No, it's 87. No, you're both right. I am coming soon, and I will give each person according to what they have done. Now look at the same language in Revelation 20. This is clearly recapitulation. The amillennialist understands this is recapitulation, but we have a problem because Jesus is coming soon to perform this judgment. And so the partial preterists get that aspect right. And I saw the dead, great and small, and the dead were judged according to what they had done. Again, both of these positions, both Chris's position and Doug's position, form ours and prove that the millennium is a past event. And then here's another passage partial preterists take as fulfilled in AD 70, Matthew 16, 27, 28. Doug says that he leans in the direction that Matthew 26, verse 27 is Christ coming in AD 70. Let's look at that. For the Son of Man, in the Greek is mello, is about to come, and he will repay each person according to what he has done. There's that same language as Revelation 22, verses 10 through 12. There are some standing here who shall not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Now look at Revelation 20 at the end of the millennium. And I saw the dead, great and small, and the dead were judged according to what they had done. Jesus is talking about his second coming that would take place in some of their lifetimes, and it would be the end of the millennium, coming of Christ to judge the dead according to what they had done. Now, Doug, again, is very confused on Daniel 7. He thinks it's the ascension. It is not the ascension in any way, shape, or form. Look at the context. The court was seated and the books were opened. When? And behold, with the clouds of heaven, there came one like a son of man, and he came not up to the Ancient of Days. No, the old Greek Septuagint says he came as or like the Ancient of Days. That's exactly how John describes him in Revelation 1, verses 7 through 17. He comes as the Son of Man upon the clouds. And then right after that, Jesus is described as the Ancient of Days. So obviously, John and Jesus are both tracking on the old Greek Septuagint when they cite Daniel 7:13 in the New Testament. Now, Daniel 12, there will be a time of tribulation. Again, Daniel 12 connects the tribulation with the time of the resurrection, such as has not happened from the beginning of nations until then. But at that time, your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book. Okay, there's the books, Daniel 7, Daniel 12. It's recapitulation. There's all kinds of recapitulation between Daniel 7, Daniel 9, and Daniel 12. All right. Okay, written in the book. will be delivered, many shall awake, some to everlasting life and some to everlasting condemnation. So Daniel 12, the immediate context, connects the tribulation with the time of the resurrection. And the Son of Man comes as the Ancient of Days to end and bring about that end of the millennium resurrection event. That is, again, the fulfillment of Daniel 12. Now, what about other passages? You heard in that video clip that I opened with, Chris Gordon said, hey, wait, the seventh trumpet is the judgment of the living and the dead. Now, it doesn't say the living and the dead in the text. It just says it was the appointed time for the judgment of the dead. But Doug agreed. He said, yes, the seventh trumpet is future, which isn't what he says in the book, I don't think. It's very confusing. But he says that it's future, and he agreed with the amillennialists. Yes, that would be the judgment of the living and the dead. Well, let's see what Scripture has to say about the judgment of the living and the dead. Acts 24:15. There is about to be a resurrection of the just and the unjust. Now, this is the resurrection of Daniel 12:2 and 3. That is the end of the millennium judgment and resurrection of the dead. And it is also the resurrection and judgment of the dead event of Revelation 11. Now, specifically, the judgment of the living and the dead. Let's look at that. 2 Timothy 4:1, Young's literal, catches mellow. Christ Jesus, who is about to judge the living and the dead by his appearing. Now, what about 1 Peter? To him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. Now, the end of all things, Peter says, is near. Now, that would be the end of the millennium. Remember, the eschatological not yet events of the New Testament, all the New Testament writers say were at hand and near, not at the end of world history. Doug has invented this concept of the end of world history and is trying desperately to read it into the New Testament, and it's just not there at all, anywhere. And I would love to debate him if the Bible teaches the end of world history. Now, notice also that here Peter says, for it is the appointed time for the judgment. So now Peter is using kairos. And where do you think his Old Testament is for this? Daniel 12:4, this Greek Septuagint says that was the appointed time for the end. And in context, verse 2 and 3, for the resurrection of the just and the unjust. So Peter is saying the judgment of the living and the dead, spoken of in Daniel 12, all right, that judgment, that appointed time of judgment, it's near, just like the book of Revelation says. Again, we're not finding this eschatological not yet at the end of world history that Doug has invented. Revelation 11 and Revelation 20, the end of the millennium. Jerusalem's judgment is the 3.5 years appointed time, kairos, for the judgment and rewarding of the dead in fulfillment of Daniel 12. Well, again, Revelation 20 is also tracking on Daniel 12. The judgment and rewarding of the dead when the books are opened. Again, that's mentioned in Daniel 7. That is connected contextually with the Son of Man coming upon the clouds in AD 70. Jesus cites it in Matthew 24:30. That would be fulfilled in his generation. That's the coming in which the books are opened. It takes place after the millennium. So again, how many appointed times and ends to the millennium are there? Well, there's only one, according to the book of Revelation and Daniel 12 itself. Let's get into a little bit of Revelation 10. We've dealt a lot with Revelation 11. Number 1, at the sounding of the seventh and last trumpet, the dead are judged and access to God is given. Well, the analogy of faith, if we look at the Olivet Discourse, at the sounding of the trumpet in Matthew 24:31, that would extend into Matthew 25, it's the same coming, is the same coming of 1 Thessalonians 4 and 5 and 1 Corinthians 15, when the dead are judged and are either cast into the lake of fire, where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth, or they're given eternal life. Number 2, the maturity to the mystery found in the Old Testament prophets would be fulfilled at this time. Now, remember, it's at the seventh trumpet sounding that the mystery of God is finished. Well, what's the mystery? The mystery is the Jew-Gentile union that was prophesied in the Old Testament, according to Paul in Romans 16. John is saying that maturity, remember, the church was growing from a boy to a man, 1 Corinthians 13, and many other places. But once that process was matured in AD 70, and that's what you see when you see the New Jerusalem coming down from heaven to earth. She is now matured. She is now grown into her maturity, and now she can now invite the nations to come in. So once the fulfillment, once that not yet comes, now you have the application of that fulfillment. You don't await another not yet, or another coming down of the New Jerusalem at the soon second coming of Jesus. Now, what about what Jesus says in the Olivet Discourse, comparing Revelation 10 and 11 with what Jesus teaches in the Olivet Discourse? He says, all that has been written in the law and the prophets in the Old Testament would be fulfilled in Jesus's contemporary generation. Luke 21 verses 22 through 32 would teach that. So again, the Olivet Discourse is in perfect harmony with what we're seeing in Revelation 10 and 11. And of course, if the Old Testament, if all that had been written in the Old Testament was going to be fulfilled in Jesus's generation, then the resurrection and the judgment of the dead of Isaiah 25, when death would be swallowed up, and Daniel 12, all of these resurrection and judgment of the dead passages would be fulfilled. And that's, of course, what Jesus and John are saying. Number 3, when Jerusalem was judged in AD 70, all of this would be in fulfillment of the appointed time, kairos. Daniel 9, 24 through 27 uses kairos. Now, Jesus uses kairos as well. We've seen kairos used in Revelation 11, Revelation 11:18, Revelation 1:3, Revelation 22, verse 10, and the appointed time was near. It wasn't thousands of years off, all right? Now, how does Jesus use kairos? When Jerusalem was judged in AD 70, all this would be the appointed time kairos in fulfillment of Daniel 9:26 and Daniel 12:4. Mark 13:33. It's also used in Luke 21. You know, the false prophets would say the appointed time was near when it wasn't. The gospel had to be preached in all the world as a sign before the appointed time would be near. It's also used in the context of the day and hour, all right? When the day and hour would come, that would be the appointed time. So when the appointed time comes in the Olivet Discourse, the second coming takes place. The times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Again, the times of the Gentiles trotting down Jerusalem for that 3.5 years, just like Revelation 11, 1 and 2 is dealing with as the time of the resurrection. And the Olivet Discourse, it's the appointed time of the end when Christ comes upon the clouds and he gathers his elect into the kingdom. Again, that is the resurrection event. If you look at all the parallels between Matthew 24 and 1 Thessalonians 4, you will see that very, very clearly. Now, conclusion. Doug reads into, that's eisegesis. He's butchering the word of God. He reads into Revelation 10 and 11 and Revelation 20, an eschatological not yet to the judgment of the dead that is nowhere found in the book itself. Nowhere. John is told the not yet events would be fulfilled shortly or about to be fulfilled in his day. Number 2, the appointed time throughout Revelation is described as near and would be the appointed time of the judgment and resurrection of the dead foretold in Daniel. Again, I've already gone over those passages. Number 3, the appointed time for the judgment of the dead is when Jerusalem would be trodden down by Rome for 3.5 years, according to Revelation 11 and Daniel 12:7, verse 4 and 7. Now, there were other issues in this debate. I'm just going to touch upon a couple of them. There was, Chris Gordon was criticizing James White because I guess he's getting too political now that he's a postmillennialist. I guess Doug and Jeff Durbin have kind of drawn him into this position, and he's talking a lot about politics. Now, I think we would all agree. I think James White would agree, Doug Wilson would agree with Chris Gordon, that ultimately the church's enemies are found in 1 Corinthians 15. They are the sin, the death, and the law, the Mosaic law. Okay. And 1 Corinthians 15 makes it really clear in verse 26. The present passive indicative is there. And the Weiss New Testament translation picks it up. And it says that death was being in the process of being destroyed. It's not biological death that is the last enemy and greatest enemy of the church. It is the death that came through Adam the very day he sinned. It's sin death. It's sin that separates man from God and his presence. It's the death that is the greatest enemy of the church. And Christ overcame that in AD 70. And if Doug really believes that he's in the New Jerusalem right now, according to Revelation 21:4, then there is no more the death for those of us that are in the New Jerusalem right now in the New Covenant age. Number 5, and there is no already and not yet. It's clear, Doug, the soon second coming of Christ, the New Jerusalem comes down from heaven to earth. Now remember, in Revelation 3:11 and 12, the church is promised in the first century, when Christ comes soon and quickly, you're going to be a pillar in the New Jerusalem and you'll never go out again, right? So they're going to get the New Jerusalem at the soon second coming of Christ. And that's what we see in Revelation. Doug is trying to say that the New Jerusalem is still in the process of coming down. That is totally foreign to the text. I wish Doug would debate us, because I would love to read these passages for Doug and have him respond and cross-examine him, but he just won't do it. Number 5, they talked a lot about the relationship between the church and the state. And they talked about, how are we to deal with other religions? Look, in my book, I deal with this, and I'm no chicken like these guys. All right. I say very clearly in this book, critiquing Islamic eschatology and Rothschild Talmudic Zionism. Okay. I point out that if your religion goes against scripture and goes against the U.S. Constitution, you should not be allowed to be in the United States. Period. Full stop. And this is why, catch it, don't take my words out of context. Okay. The Quran teaches Muslims that they are to have a world conquest. They are to rule the entire world by subjecting Christians and others to Sharia law. You either convert to Islam or you're beheaded, or you're alive and you are a financial slave to Islam. That is not biblical, and that is not according to our Constitution. We have laws here, and Sharia law is not among them. So if that is your belief system, then you are not allowed to be a citizen here. It should be really simple. Now, what about all these good Jews that we have here that believe that the Talmud is inspired? Well, the Talmud teaches that Jesus is boiling in his own poop and urine. The Talmud teaches that Christians should be killed, and if a Jew kills a Christian, he performs an act of worship to God. It talks about the Jew constantly being at war with Christians, that they should depopulate them, and that they should enslave Christians through financial means. Hello, Rothschilds. Hello, the central banks of central banks, and the Fed, and all of this. All right. So if your religious documents talk about enslaving people financially, killing other religions, and ruling the globe, then I'm sorry, that is not compatible with Christianity, number one. And if we're just going to approach this politically, I'm sorry, but that's treason. If you're holding to those views, if you believe the Talmud is inspired and you want to implement that upon the citizens of the United States, or if you believe the Quran is inspired and you want to implement that and subjugate United States citizens under that, that's treason. And you're not welcome here in my book. Okay. I'll love you as Christ commands me to, but I don't have to embrace your position as compatible in any way, shape, or form with Christianity, let alone the U.S. Constitution. You need to go somewhere else where Sharia law is practiced. You need to go to Israel, okay, and rule the world from Israel if that's what you want to do. But don't come here in my country and try and manipulate our congressmen and our senators and our presidents that we have to support Rothschild Israel, because that's all it is. It's modern Israel is not a fulfillment of any Bible prophecy. I would love to debate someone on that. I've tried to reach out to Rabbi Tovia Singer, tried to reach out to Michael Brown for a follow-up debate on that particular subject. He will not do it. But modern Israel is not a fulfillment of any Bible prophecy, and that creates a lot of problems for us politically. So anyway, guys, I hope this video was beneficial to you. I hope it gets to Chris Gordon. I hope it gets to Douglas Wilson. Look, guys, I will debate both of you at the same time. It wouldn't be hard, and I would just take both of your positions and form mine. Now, Doug, you know that's exactly what happened right here, buddy. Our response to your book. We destroyed it when you thought you could go shoulder to shoulder with an all-millennialist and disprove full preterism. You know that was an epic disaster for you. Why don't you try it in an oral debate? Why don't you try getting Chris Gordon, get buddy-buddy with him and say, hey, let's go after these full preterists. We mentioned them in our debate. Well, let's show that our views can refute them. Let's do that, Doug. Let's see how well that goes for you. You know it won't. So anyway, guys, hope you enjoyed the video. And again, would you please consider supporting me in my full preterist polemics and apologetic work. Now, again, polemics is going on the offense. Apologetics is defending your position from attacks from others. I'm not just a defender of the truth. I go on offense. When I played basketball, my idea of a great defense was a better offense. I would often go in the huddle and say, hey, guys, I'm out scoring the guy that's guarding me by 12 points. If all of us did that, we'd be winning the game. Of course, that's why I didn't go to college, because I played too much offense and not much defense. But the point of the matter is that we need to be aggressively going out on offense, critiquing these people and challenging them to debates. And that's what I'm trying to do. And I really could use your financial support. I would like to do this part-time and then eventually move into it full-time, kind of like what my friend and partner in our Preterist Apologetics podcast, Don Preston, is able to do. So again, guys, hope you enjoyed it, and please consider financially supporting and helping me. Thank you.